You have found Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggle stories and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. Past episodes of the Authentic Business Adventures program can be found on the podcast link at drawincustomers.com. We are coming to you from the Sun Prairie Community Radio Studios, underwritten by Bank of Sun Prairie. My name is James Kademan, entrepreneur, author, speaker, and helpful friend to small business owners across the country. Today, we are welcoming / preparing to learn from Crystal Banse of Banse Law Group. Crystal, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great, despite it being a Monday.
Yeah, right? It's rough. So Banse Law Group, this is your business.
It is.
All right. And how long have you had it?
So I actually incorporated coming up 2 years on January 3rd.
Oh, wow. You got the date down.
It was right after the new year.
Oh, nice. So what made you decide to go off on your own?
So there's a little bit of a backstory. I served in the military for 6 years.
Sure.
I was in the Wisconsin Army National Guard.
Okay.
And then I was also working a full-time job at the Department of Justice in Madison.
Okay.
And then I went on active duty from 2014 through 2016.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I worked out of the Pentagon, helping to start a Victims of Sexual Assault Legal Assistance program.
Okay.
And I medically retired from the military on September 30th of 2016. And I started working at a local firm.
Sure.
I didn't want to go back into the government sector at that point. And I was presented with an opportunity.
Sure.
And while working at the firm, it became quickly apparent that I really wanted to do things my own way.
Okay.
I was given a lot of leeway in the military. Many people who've been served know a lot of times you just get thrown into a situation and are like, here, fix a problem.
Sure.
And
just solve this.
So I basically helped start this program with no resources, no formal guidance. I mean, yes, I had a boss, but they were kind of like, do what you got to do to get things done.
All right.
And I felt that really prepared me to learn about what I wanted to do and decide I wanted to do that. So I decided to leave the firm and start my own firm, as well as another business that I was working on at the time.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you started your own business. Is this the first business that you started?
This is the first business that I started.
And so far, so good?
So far, so good.
All right. What have you learned in the past couple of years since starting your business?
Gosh, there's so many different things. I think, number one, especially in the legal profession, but I think it would be in other professions as well, dialing down what you want to do.
Okay.
I think in the beginning, especially with any new business, you tend to say yes to everything because one, you're afraid that you're not going to make any money, not going to have enough stuff to do.
Sure.
And there's a tendency to just accept clients, accept cases or projects that maybe are not something that you love to do. Maybe you're not as well versed in it as you should. And I think learning to become less general and more specific is a good baseline.
That's fair. Focus, the power of focus. I was just talking with a client of mine about that. It's like chasing the rabbit, right?
Well, and it's a big thing in like self-help or motivational or success, books about that. Very much that you cannot be an expert in everything that you do.
True.
So
Very true.
I've found, for even just my sanity level, if I'm not jumping from family law to criminal law to trusts and estates, business law, I'm able to be a better attorney and a better business person in that specific area that I've decided to focus on.
Plus, I imagine it's easier from a marketing standpoint.
Absolutely.
Because the education is a little bit, or quite a bit, lower because you don't have to tell people, I do contract law, as well as litigation, wills, whatever, you want to buy a watch, anything you have.
Exactly.
That you can just say you do this specific focus. So it sounds like you have a focus now.
I do.
Okay, and what is that?
So I have kind of pivoted to helping small businesses and startups, providing legal assistance at affordable rates. Oftentimes, especially with small business owners, I've found in startups, they don't have a legal budget.
Sure.
They can't go to the big firm in town and afford their rates.
Right.
And there's a need for quality legal services for startups and entrepreneurs, because it doesn't matter what type of business you're in. There are legal issues, whether it's with licensing,
Oh, sure.
employment contracts, contracts between you and your clients. I do some work on privacy policies in terms of use on websites.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Lots of different things that the entrepreneur isn't thinking about.
Right.
And what I like to do is come in and help new businesses and small businesses do things right the first time or revamp it.
Sure.
So that they don't end up with litigation or costly legal battles of one sort or another.
Sure. That's fair. So are you, most of the clients that you deal with, have they been entrepreneurs and that's how you evolved into this? Or has it been something that has become more of a passion of yours from you starting your own business?
So I have a background in business already. I have a business degree. I worked in marketing before I went to law school. So I've always been interested in business. And actually, one of the compliments I received recently was that I seem more like an entrepreneur than I do a lawyer.
Okay.
And so I like that, because
Sure.
I'm not what you consider your typical lawyer. A lot of people think, oh, you love arguing, you love,
Sure.
conflict and creative solutions.
Sure.
I'm all about creative solutions, and I'm all about proactiveness, but I am not the aggressive type. I don't like fighting. I'm
Sure.
actually a very peaceful person.
Okay.
And I really like helping people realize their goals and making their life easier by taking the legal aspect off their plate.
Sure. Interesting. So I work with small businesses, and one of the challenges that I have is sometimes with people that are starting their own business or fairly new to business, they don't quite have the thick skin, so some could argue thick head, needed for a business, that they just haven't, was quite matured to that point. And then I imagine you working with them on a legal side probably see that even more so.
Oh, absolutely. I was actually just talking about this with a friend of mine. I was in Alaska for business,
Sure.
and we were talking about how a lot of people get into who are entrepreneurs. Perhaps they're a great baker and they love baking bread, but they can't run a business.
Sure.
And so what I try to do is, with other partnerships, with other businesses or people I know,
Sure.
point people, especially people who are just straight up starting a business, haven't done anything, point them in the good direction for insurance, accounting. And I'm part of that component too, legal
Sure.
services, and stressing that you don't have to have me on a retainer every month, but that if you have a problem or something comes up, you have a trusted person you can call.
That's fair. That's totally fair. So it's interesting that you say this, because now I'm thinking back to one of my, I have a checklist, a business startup checklist that says, just the basics of what to have. Set up an LLC, EIN number, get a separate checking and savings account, blah, blah, blah. All that main stuff. And one of the things that I had in there was if you have a partnership, to get a partnership agreement.
Absolutely.
And then I put on there that you could just find a basic one online and just tweak as needed, and then get an attorney to go over it if you need to, kind of thing. And I had an attorney friend of mine say, what do you mean have an attorney go over it? They should create it from scratch. So can you tell me just your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I have mixed feelings. Of course, you can always go to LegalZoom. I've had a fair amount of people come from either doing something similar like
Sure.
that and needing it updated, or perhaps it's not from Wisconsin and there's a Wisconsin nuance, or it's just very, very generic. So the answer to that question is, as an attorney, I'm not going to sit here and say, I create everything from scratch.
Sure.
There are state bar templates. I build off previous agreements. I've
Sure.
never actually, typed up a partnership agreement from scratch.
Sure.
So I can understand what that attorney is saying, and I think what they're saying is, don't fall into the pitfalls of going online, because you could be downloading something that is so out of date or not correct, and if you're not a lawyer,
Sure.
then that's when you're going to run into trouble. So I do agree with your friend that you should have an attorney draft it for you, but it's not necessarily going to be some sort of from scratch
Sure.
endeavor.
You get the blank Word document in front of you.
Right.
So how do you come up with, one of the challenges that I thought of when doing this, or in putting that together, was how can any one attorney think of every single angle where something could go wrong that you're trying to cover into an agreement like that?
Great question. I mean, it depends on the industry. When I work with clients who are very technology savvy, there's a lot of different technological issues. Like I said before, privacy policy, terms of use of a website. Those are things that are very important for all companies that have a web presence. But if that's your main bread and butter, very, very important. But surprisingly, you can come up with most things that will apply to most industries. And every once in a while, there might be something, specific to an industry that we add or delete. But for the most part, it's going to be consistent across industries. The language just may change, and but for the most part, people want, what's the scope, what's the price they're going to pay, terms of payment, non-payment, confidentiality if that's an issue. I mean, there's plenty of other things, but generally you can create a agreement that would fit for most companies without being very, very specific.
Sure. Now let's shift into privacy policy, because you mentioned that a few times, and I know, is it GDPR, the whole European thing? I imagine that triggered. And I know with WordPress, they threw up the privacy policy thing. You got to have that, blah, blah, blah. So what can you tell me about working with an attorney for a privacy policy?
Sure. One of the things I've done for some clients is reviewed their privacy policy, which tends to be copied from someone else. And the European thing is an issue, but in terms of the United States, there's really no regulation or regulatory body saying that you need to have this or X or Y or Z. So again, it's looking at what that person's website's for. Is it e-commerce? Is it just informational? Is it some sort of portal or where there's discussion back and forth? And you work around that and you decide, one, what your client wants and what is best practices. So there's no actual formal body in the United States or really the world that, demands it says something specific. So it really depends on the industry.
Okay, gotcha. Have you seen any weird things that people have come to you with?
No, I've just seen some, whether it's from copied and pasted and not applicable to their website. Or sometimes things with extreme legalese, and I'm a big proponent of making things easy to read and simple and avoiding those lawyer terms that just don't need to be there. That's a big school of thought that when I went to school, plain legal writing. So a lot of times, again, when I'm working with clients, I am actually cleaning up their documents, whether it's a privacy policy or scope of agreement. So it's not 25 pages because it doesn't need to be.
No.
And it's something that an attorney can read and understand. It's not, I mean, there's some I've seen where I struggle to understand what they're saying because there's so many whereases and acronyms or the company, and it's just like, use the name so it makes sense. So I find that I do a lot of that. So cleaning it up and making sure it's applicable and has the most recent developments. I mean, there are developments in the privacy world and websites and privacy policy, and there's organizations that, I go to and take classes about and learn. So that's kind of how I approach it.
So what is your favorite type of client to work with? Small business is pretty large, I guess, in that regard. Is it mostly service-based businesses or e-commerce or retail?
I found service-based organizations I've enjoyed really working with. But it's really anybody who's passionate about their business and passionate about doing things the right way. people who are cost conscious but understand that it is necessary
Right,
to
right.
hire somebody and not take the short
Sure.
route out. But I really like working with new startups. They
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily mean new people who've never done a startup before,
Sure.
but I really enjoy that because there's just a really great energy.
Mm-hmm.
People are generally happy. They're excited about
Sure.
whatever they're doing, and I've been able to ferret out people who are serious and who aren't, and work with those people because they really appreciate what I'm doing for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really ultimately, at the end of the day, I want to be able to be helping people.
Sure. That's awesome. That's awesome. It's interesting that you say that people are passionate about it. 'Cause I teach this business planning class, and there's, I don't know, half a dozen students in there, maybe a little bit more than that, for this particular session. And we always go through every week. I have them do this little introduction thing, what they're doing, and they just have a conversation with another partner in there. And they're so shy. And I'm like, you get to design your business. Like, this is your dream that you're putting together, and you're feeling a little less than confident in talking about it. And if you're not confident talking about your own business, who else is going to be?
Absolutely.
So it's interesting trying to get them into that dynamic. Like, now is not the time to be shy. Now is the time to shout it from the rooftop.
Absolutely.
You have to get
and
the business in.
for example, when I get a client who presents, hey, is this a great, I want to enter into this investment contract. Can you review it? Tell me if it's a good investment. Well, first of all, I tell them I'm not a financial advisor and they should talk to their financial advisor. But what I do love is being able to go back to the client and say, hey, okay, I've reviewed this. Overall, I think it looks good, but I think you should ask this question, and this question before and just get those answers because that way you can make the informed decision.
Sure.
And it works out great. I really enjoy that. It's just very interesting to me. Again, typically people are happy, so they're not being forced to invest in something. And they appreciate someone else's eyes who are looking at it who aren't emotionally involved or financially involved in any way, shape, or form. Because at the end of the day, whether they invest or not, it doesn't matter to me.
Sure.
But I like being able to make sure that people who maybe aren't as well versed in the law or even, investments understand the pros and cons of entering into that agreement.
That's fair. That's fair. So, do you do with I want to say contract law for like business sales and stuff like that?
Yep, absolutely. Okay. So, are you talking about like mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I've the reason I ask is I have a couple, some current and some past clients that have sold their business or in the process of selling it, and some that I can't tell if the people that are trying to sell it really want to sell it or if they're just wasting their attorney's time. But there's a lot of back and forth with that on one. Let's say typically it's the seller that's having an issue. For maybe it's cold feet or something like that, where they have their attorney drafting something up and then send it to the buyer's attorney.
Yep.
And then there's a little back and forth where I feel like the seller and buyer are almost removed a little bit, like they don't have any direct conversations. And I always say there's nothing that two people on a whiteboard can't solve. I feel like somebody is just wasting a lot of time and money on here. And I see that happening I would say that is the opposite of the exception to the rule. It's actually more common than it's not.
Absolutely. And I think that that's kind of more of an old school approach. And some of the bigger firms, that's just how it works.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm not saying every firm.
Sure.
But, for me, I agree with you. When I have clients who are either interested in buying or selling, or I've represented someone in a shareholder dispute, so they're trying to exit the business.
Sure.
I find that getting everyone into a room or two separate rooms, depending on what the dynamic
have two cans
is.
and a string here. Right?
Yeah, kind of, and you run back and forth, and you try to make an agreement. And I'm basing that off of my past experience in civil litigation and in criminal law, or even when I was doing some family law and stuff like that. You get a lot more headway, and it's so much easier because usually people aren't that far off, but they want to be heard.
Sure.
They things get lost in translation and email, like you said, that can become very costly. Now, not in every situation would I recommend that.
Sure.
But if you two are interested in, someone's interested in buying your company and you're interested in selling, you obviously have something in common. You should be friendly. That doesn't mean that tough negotiations can't occur.
Sure.
But like you said, it's a lot easier to have your client next to you and say, okay, I think this is what we should do. Let's do this next.
Right.
And not have, well, we'll send an email and then 2 weeks later we'll get a response. And that seems a bit more old school to me. So I'm a big fan of getting people together, even if it's a business dispute, if possible, and trying to, obviously, the end goal is not litigation or lawsuits for anybody. And I have stopped doing that type of work for the most part.
Okay.
So if that was to transpire, I have trusted partners and people that I would refer them for commercial litigation.
Sure.
But I really try to just do the negotiating and the meeting of the minds. And I've found it to be successful so far.
Fair. Totally agree. So you raise an interesting point, though, that you don't do litigation anymore. You used to. So what caused you to get out of it?
So I did a lot of litigation that was in criminal law, and then when I worked for the DOJ, I did civil litigation. So I was in court, well, when I was a prosecutor daily, and jury trials in both state and federal court. I've argued before the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. It's a very, very high stress level.
Sure. Okay.
And I loved the experience, and then when I was in the military, I was in court-martials and other types of proceedings, and I was dealing with really heavy topics, so sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, neglect, and just for my own well-being, I decided that it was time to get out of that, just from personal experiences and just years of working on that, and I found that this type of work gives me joy. I'm getting business, and
that's good.
I really like it. So it's not that unusual. A lot of attorneys, especially around 5-6 years, you'll see that people will switch to either not being an attorney at all or moving over to more transactional type of work or consulting, advising, whatever you want to call it. And then what's funny, too, is I just had coffee with a friend who was kind of on the opposite end of me, where all they wanted to do was, mergers and acquisitions and business transactions, and now they're doing, almost exclusively litigation. And because they found that they really like that. And another thing about litigation, too, I think there's a misnomer is you're in court all the time. It's a lot of writing. It's a lot of back and forth. So it isn't always that exciting courtroom drama. And I got a little bored with that, to be honest.
All right, that's fair. Totally fair. You raised a couple interesting points that I want to, segue into. One of them, let's talk about marketing. How have you marketed your business before, and what has been successful for you? So let's start there.
Sure. So I'm really happy to admit that I have not spent a single penny on any advertising.
Oh, wow.
So I have used my professional and personal network. I'm very active on Facebook. That's where I've gotten a lot of referrals. And then it's through word of mouth. And I'm working with a firm to improve my social media presence. And so it's been mostly through referrals of past clients and Facebook that have been really successful for me.
That's cool. That's very cool. And is there room for growth, expansion?
Absolutely. I'm to the point where I recently sort of took a step back and determined what would be good for me and what would be most effective in terms of administrative help and everything like that. So now I'm using a virtual assistant for not a lot of hours each week, but it's very helpful, so I'm able to stay organized and keep taking business on without taking too much on, because I
Sure.
think there's a point in anybody's business where if you just keep taking stuff and it's just you,
Oh, there's a capacity
you're
issue
going to
there.
get overwhelmed,
Yeah.
and the quality of service is going to go down. So I've slowed down a little bit with actively pursuing clients, and
Sure.
now doing sort of the more I guess I should also mention networking, some networking groups. I'm part of the Wisconsin Veterans Chamber of Commerce. I'm their Madison chapter chair.
Okay.
But I also use that as a networking tool.
Sure.
And the Latino Chamber of Commerce in Dane County is another big source of referrals for me.
Okay.
And I've been a volunteer and supporter of them for some time.
Sure. Do you speak Spanish?
I speak a little bit, but
Okay.
I do work with someone who is fluent, so
Gotcha.
I do have some clients that speak Spanish.
Okay. Sure. Sure.
I also have some clients that speak other languages.
Sure, that's awesome.
I don't speak any other languages,
Sure.
but we do what we can, and we find them translators if needed be.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Wisconsin Veterans Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
I have never heard of that. That's crazy. That's got to be a big group, I imagine.
It is. So I actually just came from one of our planning meetings.
Oh, really?
And it's started in Milwaukee by a guy named Saul Newton, I want to say 2 years ago. It
Okay.
now has over 200 members.
Oh, wow.
And about 18 months ago, they started doing some events in Madison, and then I came on as the chapter chair, and we're really trying to ramp up
Sure.
the types of events and our presence in Madison. So it's not uncommon for people to have never heard of it, and
Sure.
that's one of our big goals, is to change that.
Okay. Big awareness thing.
Absolutely.
I suppose 2 years. It just sounded like it'd been around for decades. And it was,
You'd be
apparently
surprised.
I was under a rock,
no.
right? That's crazy. Interesting. So let's move on into the logistics of your operations and stuff like that. Do you work out of your house? Do you have an office?
I used to start, when I first started, I worked exclusively out of my home. And when I decided to take this really seriously, not that I wasn't taking it seriously,
No,
but
I know what you mean.
really take it to the next level, because there's only so many times you can go meet people in Starbucks and talk
Right.
about their private legal problems.
Right.
And
Fair.
I actually had somebody meet me at a coffee shop and ask me if I was a real lawyer.
Oh, there's a red flag.
It's so
Well, that's like, why am I getting this question?
right. And that following day, well, I had been thinking about getting office space, because especially as a solopreneur, working out of your home can be a little stir crazy.
Sure.
And I just felt for growth and legitimacy of the business, I needed an office space. So I took a look at a bunch of different places, and I ended up going to a co-working space in downtown.
Oh, nice.
So it's cost effective for me, and it's a great spot. It's very close to the courthouse, even though I don't go to the courthouse that
Sure.
often. But your appearance is everything, so a good address and adds legitimacy to my business. And
Nice.
so I started with just renting co-working space, and then I grew quickly, so I now have my own dedicated office within the co-working space.
Sure.
And I absolutely love that.
Nice.
And I love the fact that I'm in a space with people that aren't just attorneys. I've gotten some business out of that, but more
very cool.
importantly, I just am able to interact with other people and other people in other industries and make connections, whether they're business, social, or political, or otherwise.
Sure.
And I really like that, so I don't feel like I'm alone.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I have a couple different stories in that regard. We'll just stick with one. When I fixed printers, I had my printer repair company. You'd run to an office, and you could just, I call them Prairie Dogs. People would pop up out of their cubicle because there'd be a new person in the office. Be this guy, myself or one of my technicians going in to fix a printer, and you just get swarmed by people that had no desire to learn what you were doing. They just wanted to talk to another human that they haven't talked to, because they have the same, cellmates or whatever you want to call them in their cubicle, right? That they've been talking to for 5 years or whatever. Or if maybe not even that, maybe they're just in this little cubicle on their own, and there's no one really around them. They just wanted that connection, just to talk to someone, even if it was the printer repair person. I remember I was at a state thing, fixing the machine. I think I counted, I had 12 people around me. And I thought, holy cow, don't you guys have something to do? But realistically, they were just so lonely, I guess.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When I worked at DOJ, and I can't say enough nice things about DOJ, but I would work in my office, mostly with the door closed, because I'd be listening to music or a podcast or whatever. And I would be writing on my computer all day. And once in a while, yeah, someone's head would pop in, or maybe you'd go and talk to someone in the lunch area. Or your assistant or whatever would come in, but it was surprisingly lonely despite working with hundreds of other people in the office. And other people did the same thing too. It wasn't like, oh, you're the person that closes your door. It's just, it is what it is. And it can get very boring. And I think that's, again, why getting the office was really helpful for me, because I was able to separate work and home. And I think that's another really important thing as a small business owner and a solopreneur, is that it tends to bleed into everything. And now I have a rule where I do some work at home. But I got rid of my printer. I got rid of, I don't have an office set up. So I will go home and do some work, but it's really, if I need to do work, I'm going to go to my office. And if I'm at home, I'm going to be at home. And some days I'll even leave my computer at the office, so I don't have that tendency, because
the temptation there, right?
Otherwise, you end up working 90 hours a week. You don't see your family. You eat takeout all the time. It's not healthy for you. And then you get burnt out and start not liking your job again, which is why you got into working for yourself in the first place. So.
Totally against what you're going for, right? Freedom, right? Freedom is working 90 hours a week.
Yeah,
for some people.
Exactly.
That's so funny. So what is the goal for growth in regards to your business? Is it to add other attorneys, or is it to maintain where you're at?
So eventually I would like to add some other attorneys. I also am working on another startup that's a legal consulting company.
Oh, wow.
And I'm not going to get into too many details about that right now. But eventually I would like to pass off this business to others and focus exclusively on that once it's off the ground and running.
Nice. Stay tuned, right?
Yep.
Very cool.
Stay tuned.
Sure. So in regards to your working with the virtual administrator, have you had any challenges working with another person? Because you were working alone essentially for however long.
Yeah. Initially, I tried someone in person, and they were very good at some things and just not so good at other things. And the basis for my model is technology-based. So I'm paperless. I hate it when people send me mail. I want it to be
I'm totally
email.
not holding paper right now.
That's okay. No, I mean, I still print out things, but rely heavily on technology. So, excuse me. But initially, working with a couple people, I wasn't getting the results I needed, and I really found that I needed someone who had experience with the law and understands that there's deadlines that are not, negotiable. Calendaring is extremely important because although, I mentioned I don't do litigation anymore, I still have cases that I have to go to court for occasionally. And I found there were challenges with something not being put on the calendar, and then I'd schedule something, and then all of a sudden there's, a hassle. Thankfully, I didn't have anything where, I never showed up or anything like that, but found that was a little bit challenging, as well as when you get prospective clients contacting you in any business, and I'm sure you know this, you need to call them back right away.
Or just answer.
Or answer, right, exactly. But if you get a voicemail, you can't wait 3 or 4 days.
No.
I've had the experience where I was actually in the midst of moving. Someone contacted me on a Monday, and I said I'd call them back Tuesday, and moving things came up, and I didn't get to call them on Wednesday, or I didn't get to call them till Wednesday. And they said, I really appreciate it, but I really needed to hire someone, so I hired someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, that's part of doing business. It's going to happen. People shop around for lawyers just like they do every other
Sure.
type of, service.
They'll commoditize anything.
Exactly. And I mean, sometimes I've had people say, like, this lawyer quoted me this, or this lawyer quoted me that, and then I can quote them over or under, depending on what I think the case is worth.
Mm-hmm.
But, that responsiveness, that if you get an inquiry, it needs to be returned that same day. So I was having a little bit of struggles with an in-person person, and I think that also to do with the fact that I don't have the capacity to hire someone full-time.
Sure.
So they're probably working another job or, have other things going on. So I found a company that does virtual assistants, and the person that I'm using now is an actual formal office manager for a law firm.
Nice.
They're bilingual, as I mentioned, because I have Spanish-speaking clients.
Sure.
And they get it, and it's what I need. I get the phone calls, the calendaring, and the stuff that I just found I was spending 2-3 hours a day on, which is, time I'm not really making any money.
Right,
and also then by the time I'm done with all that, I'm tired and don't want to actually do the work that I've been hired to do. And then I'm working late hours. And so that has been a huge relief, because I know that somebody has my back. They're, the company I went with, the person is based out of Chicago area,
okay.
so there's not...
It's not Philippines
No,
somewhere.
it's not. I haven't worked with anyone directly in that case, but I've seen how that works, and I just think for my type of business, it wouldn't be effective.
Sure.
And so it was really important for me, and I did a lot of research on different companies and interviewed a bunch to see what would be good. And basically, I have a great person. They just don't live in Madison, Wisconsin.
Totally fine. Totally fine. They get the job done, so that's super cool. Yeah, with calls on call and stuff like that, there's a trust factor that I don't know if everyone that reaches out to us necessarily understands until we tell them. I mean, I guess you can tell them until you're blue in the face, but realistically, they have to see it or understand it or just take the leap and learn for themselves. That there's a huge trust factor that goes on.
Oh, absolutely.
That when you're the company answering the calls or exchanging emails with clients and stuff like that, that you're essentially the voice, so to speak, of the company, and that's a huge deal.
Absolutely.
Not to be taken lightly. So, yeah, finding someone, even in-house person. When I had my print repair business, I tried an in-house person. That was a train wreck. I thought I was good at hiring, but it turns out back then I wasn't the greatest in the world. Hopefully I've improved. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, you learn. So that's a big deal. It's awesome that you were able to outsource that essentially to remove that from your plate.
Well, and what's great about that is I don't have to worry about payroll taxes. There's, laws about what an independent contractor can do. They can't have they can't have their email address connected to your...
Sure.
And so there was just a lot of different things, and I just didn't really want to deal with that. And as a small business owner, I don't have to worry about that. I pay a service. They handle that stuff. That person gets their 1099 at the end of the year. I don't have to worry about that.
Plus, you can throttle it as you get busier or less busy, whatever.
Exactly.
All that jazz. Yeah. It's interesting because we'll have people with calls on call that will quit our service and hire someone. And then either that person quits or they realize, wait a second, this person is costing me 5 times the amount that you guys were. And they're doing worse. And they have vacations and sick time and sick kids and all this baggage that every employee comes with. That we just absorbed all of that.
Right.
So it's interesting how they thought, oh, we've grown to the point where we need someone in-house. We have many clients that have grown to the point where they need some office help in-house, but they still keep us to answer calls and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are two different sort of subsets because, like I mentioned, some of the people that I had brought on, fantastic at doing some of that admin in-person stuff, but just not quite right with the phone calls or the follow-up with clients or scheduling. And so there's a place for everybody. And
right.
and so but it's an interesting thing to learn. And people think like, oh, you can just hire someone for $15 an hour, but once you add all like the taxes and stuff, these services are actually much more affordable, and you're not under the burden of any of those, if they slip and fall at your work or something, like it's not, it's nice. And, the woman that I work with has kids, just like I have a child. And so she works from home. So it's not like I ever have to worry, my kid's sick, so I can't really work today. They're still available by phone. I am completely understanding of family and family needs, and it works out because they're happier because they get to be home when their kids come home from school. I'm happy because my work's getting done, and I don't have to provide extra office space. I don't have to provide a computer. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you don't think about, and those things add up. A
ton of expenses. Yeah. Employees are not cheap, that's for sure. Going into shifting in just business as a whole, can you tell us what have some of the challenges been from starting your business?
So I think I alluded to this earlier. Definitely learning to say no.
Oh, okay. Huge one.
Huge one. And I'm not just talking about clients, but I get a lot of asks for coffee. Madison loves, hey, let's grab a cup of coffee.
There are a lot of coffee shops.
And sometimes I don't understand why, I've started to look as to how is this going to benefit me and my business, and or how can I help this person for whatever reason.
What's the goal, kind of thing?
And if I can't answer that, I've learned to say no. So there's always a saying of, I think in the beginning you're really enthusiastic. Another thing is networking groups. There's a million of them.
Oh, endless, yeah.
You could go to something every morning and every day in Madison, and then some. And I really encourage all people, regardless if they're starting their own business or for whatever reason, test out some groups. I found some groups that were great. For example, the Veterans Chamber. I can't speak highly enough of it. But then there's other groups that I've gone, and it's either feels like a singles party or maybe just people who are all looking for jobs, and I'm not in the position to hire anybody. Or if it's a lawyer organization, networking with other lawyers can be beneficial. But in terms of getting business, is that the most productive use of my time? Probably not. So I think in the beginning I joined all these groups and chambers and spent a bunch of money, and then saw no results from some of them, then saw results that were exponentially more than I paid or whatever in dues. And I've slowly stepped back on, my involvement in groups and also just participation in them. So I'm only involved in three groups right now, really involved in. And I've found that the smaller ones sometimes tend to be better. And they're hit or miss. I've gone to some where I'm like, okay, I'm never going to go to that group again. Or it's just not, really it's just not the right fit. There's nothing wrong with it, and maybe someone else loves it or finds success in that. But learning that not every group is going to be the right fit, and asking yourself, am I actually getting something out of this membership? Especially when some of them become very pricey.
Oh, yeah.
Or some of them...
And both time and money.
Yep, with the commitment, too, like time and money. There's some where it's like you have to be at this place at 8 a.m., every Tuesday, and... bring 5 new people, and it's like, that's a lot for me, And so learning which of those groups because I do a lot of networking and based marketing, those are important, but learning not to overextend yourself. And so kind of the rule of thumb I use now is I will do 2 events a week at maximum. So
that's pretty healthy.
Yeah, so I don't. There was a time where I was like, every day I could have gone to something. And now I do at maximum 2. And usually it'll be like a morning thing and one evening thing or something. So that's one of the parts of learning to say no. Then going back to clients, even if it's not a right fit, so what I do is I offer an initial consultation with someone for an hour at a discounted rate. One, I found offering free consultations, you get a lot of people who...
Oh, sure. Quick, give me free advice that you can fit 5 years into this 1 hour.
Exactly. Or at the end, then they're like, I have no money, I can't hire you. And I found that I needed to do something to compensate my time, but I offer a discounted rate. So it's very affordable. So, you know, as you and my client or potential client come to meet me, see if we get along, see if we have matching ideas. Do you want... is the type of attorney you're looking for the kind of attorney I'm practicing? You know, if you come to me and say, I want to file bankruptcy, I'm not going to help you. I don't have those skills, but I'll give you a great referral. But like I said, I think that's really important. And sometimes there are just clients that aren't good fits. And it's been hard to say no. Or people, when you want to make sure you have a positive cash flow going and not, you know, be struggling or stressed out every month. Oh, maybe I should take this probate case or something that I'm not real well versed in, or I'll take another divorce because they'll pay well or whatever. And I've learned to say I'm not practicing that anymore. And the first couple times it was a little scary, and now I'm just like, nope, don't even do that. And people are respectful of it, and I think that's helped me with my sanity and be able to focus on the types of business I want to do and be the most skilled I can be at that. So people know me that I'm an expert in that, not just some jack of all trades.
Right.
I do everything okay, but...
Yeah, it certainly gives you some strength in the area that you focus on. And I imagine there's other attorneys you can refer to for
Absolutely,
specific...
and that's one thing I really take pride in is making sure I have good quality referrals out to people. So a lot of times, you know, if someone calls you from seeing you on Yelp or whatever, which I do not advertise on, but I'm on it.
Right.
You know, and it's a car accident, and that's just something I've never touched, don't plan on touching, and I have a list of 3 or 4 people I can refer them to that I know are quality people, and it won't reflect poorly on me.
Right.
But I think number one, you know, making sure it's a good fit, learning to say no, and those are kind of the big things.
No, that's a strong one. The power of no. It's interesting you say that because I had a little presentation that I did. I don't know if it was a year or 2 ago, something like that. And I was talking about the power of no and how you have to say no, you know, 50 times to be able to say yes that one time, right? Because it doesn't take very long at all for somebody to ask you to do something. But what they're asking you may take a ton of your time, right?
Absolutely.
Like for someone to say, hey, will you join my networking group that meets once a week on Tuesdays? It took them seconds to ask you, but if you would say yes, you just gave up 10% of your work week to this networking group. And I had a woman that got so mad. She's like, I can't say no to all this stuff. You kind of have to.
Honestly, right now I have a couple things on my calendar that I have to turn down, and I'm a little struggling with how to say, hey, I really appreciate you thinking about me for this, you know, discussion about family law, but I'm not practicing that anymore, and I don't know how to you know, I mean, I guess it's just being honest, but
right. Nothing wrong with that. Luckily, you made it here, so we're good, right? What is your least favorite thing about owning your business?
When I'm not working, I'm not making any money. So it's hard to go on vacation or be off the grid, or sometimes even the holidays. It's a never-ending cycle of a really long to-do list that always seems to get longer.
Right? That's fair. Totally fair. Have you ever made any expensive mistakes in business?
Yes. One, doing business with quote-unquote friends.
That's a rabbit hole.
Yep, that's a mistake that I made. Also, giving clients who are not friends, but a little bit too much leeway and answering their phone call at 7 p.m., which is fine on occasion, but then all of a sudden that means...
They're expecting that to be the norm.
Exactly, and I've had people who've gotten very upset when I am literally, you know, having dinner with my family or not able to answer a phone call about a legal problem. And they expect, you work 24/7 and are on
Oh,
call
sure.
for them, and that can be frustrating
Mm-hmm.
and lessons. So I very much, when I initially started, I said I wanted to be flexible, and I still
Mm-hmm.
am, and I do pride myself on some of these value-added services. So if someone has they want to start a business, but they work full-time, I meet people after hours or on a weekend.
Sure.
But that's by appointment only, and that's an exception to the rule.
Right.
I'm not there all the time.
Right.
And so I think giving people those parameters, I've now started on, little things like my voicemail. These are my business hours.
Sure.
If I'll call you, I strive to call back within 24 business hours. But, a lot of times, especially with the law, people are very emotionally involved and they're emotionally riled up, whether it's positive or negative, and they want
Sure.
stuff to happen yesterday. And I think being very clear with clients and potential clients that I'm their counsel, but I'm not 24/7. And that's helped, but definitely some mistakes. And then of course with billing and taking clients that
Sure.
maybe can't afford to pay or can't afford your services,
Sure.
or even just taking a client that something didn't feel quite right, whether not that it's sketchy or anything, but just
Right.
the fit isn't right. And so those are some mistakes that have definitely cost me some money in the last
Sure.
couple of years.
Sure.
And so now, if friends need assistance, for the most part, unless it's something really simple, I refer it out.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And most of my friends know that about me, especially if it's something like contentious, like a divorce. Because what I'd hate is for something to go awry, and then
Right.
it's
That puts you in a very awkward
exactly
spot. Sure.
exactly.
Sure,
So I
that's-
don't like to mix business and pleasure.
Sure. Do you have any challenges that you're still trying to overcome?
Staying organized,
Ah, okay.
which hopefully my assistant is going to help me with.
Sure.
Staying time blocking is a huge
Okay.
thing.
You explain that a little?
Sure. So, right now I don't have blocks of time because I work when I can.
Sure.
But in terms of a healthy lifestyle and spending time with my family and doing the things that I care about, like working out or doing yoga, that's been a challenge because I've just been working, and then I don't go because I'm
Sure.
in the middle of it. So I've
Sure.
been really trying to make a conscious effort to time block out so I have the ability to spend time with my family. Certain nights I have the ability to go to my favorite yoga class or whatever. From 4 to 5 I'm going to be working out, so don't schedule
Don't bug
anything.
me.
So those are kind of the things. I also like to try to take half a day off in the middle of the week or
Oh,
so,
nice.
because I can do some of the daily things that people do on the weekend, and it's not so crowded at the stores and everything. And that just is because I do work sometimes on the weekend.
Sure.
And it blends in.
Sure. I just wait for Packer games.
Well, that too. That's a great time
That's
to
the
go.
best time to go shopping.
It is.
I love it. So if you were to give some advice for someone that was considering starting a business, whether it was their own law practice or just general business of any kind, what are some of the things that you would recommend to them?
So Madison One has some amazing entrepreneurial ventures and organizations that can help you. I'm not going to name specific ones,
Sure.
but I think that anybody who's considering that, especially if they don't have a background in business, should look into that. There's some great things where they'll help you write a business plan. They'll help you get funding if it's something where you need funding, or at least provide that or a sense of community with other entrepreneurs. I think it's really important for us entrepreneurs to work together.
Fair.
One thing, a lot of times in these networking groups, it's like, well, they're a lawyer and you're a lawyer, so we can't have that.
Oh, sure.
And it's like, they probably don't do anything that I
Right.
do. And in fact, part of the Veterans Chamber, there's several lawyers, and none of us do the same thing that each other do. So why that's not competition. It's great to have those people, like-minded people. I think it's really important to get involved with something where there are other entrepreneurs, so you can even go and vent and be like, man, today was a sucky day. I lost a client, or I made a huge mistake, or I'm not sure what accounting firm to use, or what. And so I think that's very important because you can feel very isolated.
Sure.
And there's a lot of different organizations in Madison and Wisconsin that offer that, or even groups, informal groups. I'm sure there's meetups and stuff of Saturday morning coffee and go talk about, business. And so that's one of the big things I would do. Starting out, kind of map out what you want to do.
Sure.
I think writing it out helps. A lot of times people just, have that idea and they go with it. But it is really important to have a business plan, especially if you're not you don't have a business background, because that really forces you to critically think about what you want, what type of measurable goals. It's important to have some sort of goal that you can reach, and I think we all know that you're more likely to be successful in goal setting and reaching if you do that. If I were to just say, I'm going to be a successful law firm next year, that doesn't pack as much punch as, I'm going to net this amount, or I'm going to secure 25 new clients or something of that nature. Right. Because that way then you can go,
something measurable, right?
Exactly.
Other than, were you successful?
Exactly.
Some arbitrary subjective phrase
I don't know what that means.
Sure, right?
So those are the things that I would give people advice. And then also, talk to providers, whether it's an attorney, whether it's insurance, accounting, those kinds of things, because someone may have this idea and then all of a sudden realize you have to buy this, outrageously expensive insurance policy.
Sure.
Have a, whatever company with chemicals or something, and then there's regulations and forms and things you have to fill out, and consult with those people so you know what you're doing, so you don't make a costly mistake or something where all of a sudden you don't have the insurance you need.
Sure, that's fair. That's fair.
I'm a big fan of risk reduction. That sounds very dorky, but...
Right? That's awesome. That's coming from the attorney background, right? That's perfect. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Crystal, for joining us. This has been a blast.
Absolutely.
You give us a lot of information. It's so interesting how some people have been in business for decades and they don't have as much information as you have after a couple of years.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
This has been Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggles, stories, and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. Coming to you from the Sun Prairie Community Radio Studios, underwritten by Bank of Sun Prairie. My name is James Kademan, business coach at Draw In Customers Business Coaching, co-owner of Calls on Call Shared Receptionist Services, and author of the Bold Business Book, available on Amazon. We'd like to thank you and our wonderful guest, Crystal Banse of Banse Law Group. Crystal, how about a website?
It's banselaw.com.
Okay, so it's B-N-S-E-L-A-W...
B-A-N-S-E.
B-A-N-S-E, I'm sorry. L-A-W.com.
You got it.
Awesome. And then how about a phone number?
608-620-5295.
Awesome. It's almost too easy. Find us airing on 103.5 Wednesdays at 1 p.m., Sundays at 2 p.m., as well as at sunprairiemediacenter.com. Past episodes can be found morning, noon, and night at the podcast link, found at drawincustomers.com. Thank you for listening. We will see you next week. I want you to stay awesome, and if you do nothing else, enjoy your business.